We're no longer under it. Galatians 3. We're not justified by it. It doesn't bring righteousness. 2 Corinthians 3, it's passing away. So then why, oh why, my dear friend, would you, as a Messianic follower of Jesus, still want to live out Torah?
Thank you for watching the MAPS Global Podcast, where we discuss leadership and culture within the convergence of worship, prayer, and missions in your neighborhood and in the nations.
And run it back. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MAPS Global Podcast. We are back with the rabbi.
No, he's the rabbi. I'm just a rabbi.
A rabbi. A conversation with a rabbi. I think it's going to be the title of this series.
All right, I like it.
It's your boy here, R.A. Martinez, president of MAPS Global, here to serve. And we are in the middle of what's turning out to be a 3-part kind of series.
Yeah.
Our first shot at talking through with my dear friend, Rabbi David Wine, who shepherds a congregation here in Richmond. Can I say the name of it? Is that all right? I mean...
Sure. Tikvat Israel.
Tikvat Israel on Arthur Ashe Boulevard. And wonderful congregation. And David and I have become close friends in the last, now 3-4 years. In fact, we were just talking off camera before we started about the night we dedicated this campus. And I think you and your wife were just in the throes of having a newborn, if I remember correctly. And so you called in, or you sent a video in where you sang the Aaronic blessing over us and over this campus. And that was amazing. And we were just talking about this funny moment where that you sent the video in, and in the video you start singing. Well, we had musicians on stage, because we always have musicians on stage, who were already playing. They were already just kind of playing background music, and you started singing, and it was in the exact key that they were playing in, and it was like this whoa moment. But awesome. That was 3 years ago, which is crazy. And I think I met you early on when we moved it down to Richmond, and have become good friends. Anyways, the idea behind this series is you and I have been having robust conversations, profound, for over the span of our friendship. And I've come to you a number of times and say, hey, help me with this. Like, here's an issue I'm wrestling with. Here's a perspective I need your thoughts on as a Messianic, which means a follower of Jesus, ethnically Jewish person. And I've found our conversations, our coffees together to be really helpful to me. And
likewise.
And so there's been, would you say there's been a mutual blessing?
I would say there's been distinction,
mutual blessing,
and even some interdependence.
Yeah, that's true. And not only myself, but our family, our spiritual family. I mean, we kind of we consider you family with us, and it's wonderful. But our spiritual family MAPS has gleaned from you. I remember, was it last year we had you on the panel for the Isaiah 19?
That was beautiful.
It was so beautiful. And you brought a perspective that none of us had really considered before, out of John 17 being Jesus's promise about Jew and Gentile reconcile. And it was just so fresh to hear a perspective that we don't normally get. And so anyways, I said a while back, we're like, hey, let's do some podcasts together and just kind of bring our viewers and listeners into some of the conversations we're having, and maybe be helpful. So here we are. We're in part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, David tells a little bit of your story of how you came to faith in Yeshua, and then your journey into becoming a rabbi and a leader. And then we just touched a little bit, which I thought was super amazing. And you can give a recap if you want, on reading the Bible from a Jewish perspective, or with the Jewish context, culture, history within our framework of reading the Bible. So any recap thoughts on that? Don't do a whole sermon because I really want to get to this.
I'll just say, if you missed it, you got to go back because everything we say today is going to be based on that.
So there you go.
I gave a summary of one of the ways to read the scriptures of Messianic Jewish theology, being, as we just mentioned, distinction, mutual blessing, and interdependence.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of what we talk about today and in the next podcast is going to be based on that.
That's awesome. So if you haven't seen it or watched it or listened to it, go back and listen to that one, and then you can jump in with us today. So here's where we're going to pick up today, where we left off last podcast. And it's this, we're calling it Paul in the Law, Paul in the Law.
Yeah.
And working title, Paul in the Law. What we want to do is take a little bit of a deeper dive into this this issue and this thing that for Gentile believers like myself, we read in the New Testament, and it's there, it's ubiquitous, really, throughout the New Testament, the law.
Right.
But without a lot of understanding of Jewish history and God's relationship with Israel, it gets a little bit lost on us. Yeah. And what happens is it becomes kind of a bad word, almost like a curse word. And we're
not under the law.
We're not under the law, or that's just law, and or works based. It becomes synonymous with like a false earned righteousness, self-righteousness. Right. And so you get all these phraseology, especially in kind of more of the charismatic wing of evangelicalism, Gentiles, where it's like the law is like the thing that's the bad thing. Right. Now it's grace. And so you have this verses thing. And then we read it, and all of the apostles, working through it, reference it in all kinds of different ways, but they use different phrases concerning it. So I think the best thing to do to start off, I know you have you're going to walk us through some stuff, but I just want to ask the big question first. Right. Help us with this. What is it? When Paul, when Peter, when James, when the writers of Hebrews, Barnabas and his friends, they all talk about it. They all reference it. They use it. They seem to contradict themselves sometimes in how they're referencing it. And it's just kind of this phrase. So help us from a Jewish perspective. What is the law? What is that?
So when the New Testament writers use the word nomos or law, it could also be translated Torah. That's what we usually say in our context, Torah. They use it in a couple different ways. And so a foundational way, and you're right, Paul does seem to say things that are different, seemingly contradictory about this one thing. Right. So for my money, the way that I understand Paul's relationship with the Torah or relationship with the law is based on Corinthians, and it's based on Acts 15 and Acts 21. Right. And there was a rumor in Acts 21, circulating that Paul taught that Jews no longer had to keep the Torah. Right. Which is,
this is when he went back up to Jerusalem, right?
The same rumor that exists right now in 2025 that he taught against the law. And they said, these are the leaders of Jerusalem, the Jerusalem congregation. They said, so that everyone will know there's no truth to this rumor, you go and take this this vow, which was like
the Nazarite vow,
and go, so that everyone will know that you are Torah positive. And if you look at it, a lot of scholars were like, well, Luke just made this up because this doesn't fit with our understanding of Paul and the law. But you and I understand that Luke didn't make that up, right? It's in there for
sure. And in terms of, when you say made it up, you mean in terms of its historical accuracy, like the event happened?
Yeah, that
Okay.
Luke made this event up because Paul would never do that. Our
Okay.
understanding.
I've never read that. That's crazy.
That they would go that far.
Yeah,
because they don't. There's no way to grasp this very Torah positive Paul.
okay.
And so when Paul seems to speak against the nomos or the law, I think what he's doing from our perspective is he's speaking against legalism. He's speaking against a system where you're doing this Torah to be righteous or so that God will love you more. And or religiousness. Like we keep the law, and we keep the law even better than you. Kind of like what Yeshua, when he gives the parable of the Pharisee. The Pharisee's like, I keep the law, I give to the poor, I fast twice a week. Oh,
Right.
it's so great, right? And he's saying that system is not a good system. Legalism is not good. But Paul says the Torah is good. The law is good. It's just that our sin nature gets in the way and perverts it to become legalism, to become religiousness. But the Torah is good. And if you look at Paul's relationship with the Torah in other books, that's consistent. But what he's against is legalism.
Okay.
That's what we would say.
So let's table that one because we're going to come back to, because I have thoughts on that. But take us in, because there's people watching now, they go, Torah, what are you talking about?
Okay.
So give us start us in kindergarten here. When you say law or Torah, what are we talking about?
So in general, the word Torah has a lot of meanings that are attached to it.
Right.
But in general, I'm talking about God's covenant with the Jewish people, and his laws that are in the scriptures, mostly in Deuteronomy, some in Exodus.
Okay.
But it's the whole of that covenant to keep kosher law, to love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay.
All those laws.
All those laws under Moses' leadership.
Yes.
So Exodus 19, Sinai through 24, God's covenant to basically take a slave people and make them a nation.
Right.
You got covenant. God puts his name on these people, calls Moses up. Moses gets the blueprint and the pattern for how to build on earth as it is in heaven,
Right.
Which becomes the tabernacle. He also gets the law.
Right.
And it's not just 10 rules. It's a whole system.
It's summarized by the 10 commandments, but there's more to it. But it can be summarized by the 10 commandments.
Interesting.
And those 10 commandments can be summarized by 2 commandments, right?
Right.
Which Yeshua tells us, love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God.
The greatest one.
Yeah. So that is the summary of the Torah, those 2.
Okay. So then when the New Testament writers start talking about the law and what its purpose was, and then also our relationship with it, they're mostly, help me, referencing the system of laws that set apart Israel as a nation. Is that a fair way to say it? As opposed to just some religious ideas, or
it's a covenantal promise.
Okay.
That Israel said, we will do this.
Okay.
We said to the Lord, we will do this and we will understand it. We will do and we will hear.
Okay. So law is that the totality, or just part of it? Like when the New Testaments get into, because I've heard this and give me clarity a little bit. When the New Testament writers, even after the finished work of the cross and we'll get into that, and grace, there's still relationship to the law. Are they talking about the whole law, or are they talking about parts of it?
I think it depends on the context.
Okay.
But law, the Torah could refer to the covenant.
Okay.
It can refer to the commandments. It can refer to the scriptures.
Interesting.
The scriptures, the Hebrew Bible is referred to, especially the first 5 books is referred to as the Torah.
Which is called the
Pentateuch.
Pentateuch,
or Tanakh, or Torah, right?
Okay.
5, Pentateuch being 5 books.
Right.
When Jesus summarizes the Hebrew Bible, he says, you've read the Torah and the prophets.
The law and the prophets.
Yeah. So he's referring to the first 5 books. So Torah can mean the first 5 books. It can mean that covenant. It can mean the whole of the laws. It can even sometimes refer to the in modern Judaism refers to the oral law, which is the set of traditions around the Torah that help support the Torah. So, and for us as Messianic Jews,
What are those called? Is there a word for that? The oral traditions?
Oral Torah.
Okay.
Oral law or oral Torah.
Okay. And that's what rabbis over the millennia have basically given commentary on how to live out the laws.
Yeah, you can think of it as a fence around the law.
Okay.
So if I told my son, if you're playing here in the front yard and the ball goes into the street, I don't want you to get it because you could get hurt. Just wait for me. I'll go get the ball. So my son says that's fine, but he says, you know what would be better if I take my ball and I play in the backyard, so there's no way the ball would even go into the street. Mm. But then he takes it a step further and he says, my dad says I have to play in the backyard. Right. So we would say, we would stop at that last one and say, well, I didn't exactly say that, but what I said was, if it goes in the street. So, but you're creating a system that is putting a fence around the law so you don't violate the Torah, which is generally good. Yeah. Except when you elevate that tradition too much, then it's bad. And Yeshua even talks about that in with regard to the traditions,
like the Sabbath. If your donkey falls in the pit,
right? Yeah.
The Sabbath is made for man.
Sabbath is for restoration,
to save lives. Yeah.
So he's bringing out the true meaning, and some of the traditions that they had were antithetical, were against what the purpose of that Torah.
Right.
And some of them were supportive, they were a fence and they were helpful.
So that's where Jesus, Yeshua, in the Sermon on the Mount, when he said, you have heard it said, but I say to you, was he giving commentary on the oral traditions that had kind of enveloped the original intention?
Yeah, he was doing that, and he was doing some other things.
Okay.
So he said, you've heard it said, if you commit murder,
right.
That's and I could go my whole life never murder anyone and be like, yeah, I'm doing the 10 Commandments. But he said, if you're angry in your heart,
right,
with that's harder. So what he's doing is elevating the Torah, right? I can go my whole life never cheating on my wife and be like, yeah, I get a medal.
Right.
Not so fast. He said, if you look with lust, that's harder.
Right.
So what he's doing is he's elevating the Torah, and he's showing the essential meaning underneath that Torah commandment so that we understand. And even in religious Judaism today, they say when the Messiah comes, he will explain the Torah, explain the meaning of the Torah to us, which is exactly what Jesus did, because he is the Torah.
Yeah. So I love that. So let me see if I can summarize a really important statement you just made, which is not unusual, by the way. The term "the law," what was the Greek?
Nomos.
Nomos. And the Hebrew, it's Torah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a word that encompasses a more broad explanation of things, not just civil or moral or religious commandments, but it could reference the first 5 books of the Bible. It could reference the whole Old Testament, biblical Hebrew scriptures. It could reference the oral traditions. So there's a lot underneath it.
And as a Messianic Jew, I would say that the New Testament is Torah for me as well, and for you.
Interesting.
Because Paul uses this phrase once, the law of Messiah, the Torah of Messiah.
Yes, the law of Christ. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's our Torah too.
Interesting. So, okay, I think we've grabbed that. So that's what we're talking about when we read the law. It's not just, a pastor who's got, a kick on something that he's discouraging everybody from, and that's law. No, when the New Testament uses law, it's talking about a very specific but broad category of things relating to God's covenant with Israel and the commandments he put around that. So then you can take it anywhere you want, but I'll just toss out a couple things with you. So then my first kind of 2 entrances into how we relate to the law, generally as believers, and then specifically the distinctions between a Gentile believer and a Jewish believer. That's where I want to land.
Right.
I think we have to, at least you referenced it, so let's just see if we can add some clarity. Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount said, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it.
Right.
And then you made the statement just about 3 minutes ago, which was like a bomb drop, and I just walked around it. You said Jesus is the law.
Yeah.
So I think before we dive in, by the way, this podcast, we're gonna dig down a little bit theologically. So just put your caps on, or if you need to take this podcast in chunks, like take a break, go walk outside, come back. I think this is super important because I think the confusion around this and the ambiguity is really robbing us from a lot of context and understanding of what the apostles are saying to us. So let's start, before we talk about how we relate to the law, can you unpack from your perspective Jesus's relation to the law and then Jesus's fulfillment of the law? Is that in your notes? Is that a big statement? Because you said you'd made that thing, Jesus is Israel kind of thing. And I was like,
he's also the Torah. He's the living Torah. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So when I think about Yeshua as a Messianic Jew, I think about if this book, if the Torah was a person, who would that person be? Right? And that's not just a person that lives out the Torah and follows the Torah and respects the Torah, but it's also a person that lives out the narrative of the Torah. So, for example, he's walking out, and this is the one man Israel, goes back to that. He's walking out the story of Israel in his own life, right? And so, for example, he goes into the desert, and before that, he doesn't really do any ministry early. So he's basically effectively a carpenter's son. He goes into the desert for how long?
40 days.
Why? Why would it be 40?
That's a great question.
Because he's walking out the story of Israel that was in the desert for 40 years, except Israel kvetched and complained and tested the Lord.
Right.
And when he was tested by the enemy, he responded with faithfulness. He responded by quoting Deuteronomy. Quoting the Torah.
Yeah, that's right.
And then
the first temptation, man shall not live by bread alone.
Exactly. Right. So, but he was walking out this as a faithful Israelite, what they should have done. Right.
In effect, redeeming Israel's story.
And yes.
Wow.
And so, and then what does he do after that? He goes through the Jordan. Right.
Right.
And even John the Baptist is like, this is weird. What shouldn't I be, shouldn't you be like,
so he gets baptized first, then he goes to the wilderness.
Right.
Right.
And
through the Jordan. Okay. Yeah. Take me in.
And so this is when Israel went through the Red Sea.
Okay.
And on one side of the Red Sea, Israel was an enslaved people.
Right.
And on the other side, they became God's people, and they were, as you said, given the Torah.
Yeah.
And he made a covenant with them. So they were activated as his people on the other side of the Red Sea. Yeshua goes from being a carpenter's son to activated, installed as the Messiah. And then he starts
by the Spirit descending on him.
Spirit, after going through the water.
Wow.
Right? Because that's what Israel did. Not because he couldn't do it any other way, but he's walking out this other story. And
Interesting.
So then he walks into the synagogue. He opens the scroll, which was probably the appointed reading for that day.
Right.
He said, "This is fulfilled."
Sovereignty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's bringing about the kingdom of God. The blind.
He reads Isaiah 61.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and then he starts his miracles.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the same story of Israel. So you can look at the scriptures, the messianic prophecies, and say, well, if you translate this as virgin or translate this word differently, maybe it doesn't apply to Jesus. But if you look at the narrative, you can't deny that. You can't deny that he was fulfilling this other narrative. So he's the fullness of the Torah in his actions, in his character. He did not break any laws, but he came to fulfill all of the laws. He fulfilled all of the prophecies, and he fulfilled the narrative story of Israel.
Yeah.
and did it with faithfulness, right?
Perfect obedience.
Perfect obedience
Yeah.
because he was the one man Israel.
Yes.
Because he's the living Torah, and because he's the Son of Man and the Son of God. So he was able to converge these things together.
That was really. I love you, bro.
I love it too, man.
So, by his perfect obedience, he lives out. He both lives out the law, and he also at the same time is redeeming Israel's story.
Right.
And where it looks like, or it's perceived that he's breaking the law, he's actually living out the original intent or true meaning of the law because he himself gave the law.
Yeah. So when it seems that way,
Yeah.
because they accuse him of that,
Totally.
he explains that, no, this is the original purpose of this. And a lot of it is about Shabbat,
Yes.
the Sabbath. And the interesting thing is that the Torah commandment is very short. It's very terse. It just says, don't work on Shabbat.
Yeah. Keep the Sabbath.
So there's a problem with that in interpretation, right? For Israel, they're reading this. They're like, well, the Bible doesn't define work.
What does work mean?
Right.
Yeah, totally.
So there's and so Judaism developed, right?
So
As a way
oral
to
tradition fills in those blanks.
fills in the gaps.
Okay.
Some of it's good,
Yeah.
right? Because you need that.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't define work, so I guess it means different things for different people, right? Because you work on Sabbath, I work on Sabbath, right? I have to because I'm the rabbi.
Totally.
So, and the priests, it's a priestly role, right? The priests had to work on Shabbat. So there's exceptions and there's different things and
Yeah.
and there's precedents, right? If Mary Sue is sick on Shabbat and you want to take her some matzo ball soup.
Totally. Or
Right.
take her to the hospital if she's.
Well, this is ancient Israel, but
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So you take her to the hospital, let's say,
Right.
or take her something that'll help her feel better.
Right.
But you do it on Shabbat, and then Nosy Nelly is like, well, you can't do that.
Yeah.
It's the Sabbath. Then, the rabbis come together and they say, well, we have to make an exception because the preservation of life is more important than
The purpose of the law was for human flourishing and preservation of life.
exactly. Got it. So they have to make a halakhic ruling or halakha being interpretation of the Torah. So, and then, the next time that happens, now there's precedence,
Yeah.
right? Because they've understood this, what the purpose is. So Yeshua enters this conversation with authority and says, this is what this means. And this is why
Yes.
you rest on Shabbat, because it's about rest and it's about restoration.
Right. And he alone has the perfect commentary on the law because, again, he's how John starts his gospel, he is the word. He
Right.
is the Torah. He is the law.
And they are always amazed at his authority.
Totally. And his clarity.
Why is that? Because
he's the one that spoke it to Moses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, guys? We're going to get right back to the episode, but I wanted to take a quick break and let you in on AG25. That is our annual gathering. This year, it's August 7th through 10th. It's going to be incredible. We've got all of our guys gathering, and our friends are going to be with us. Billy Humphrey from Gate City, Atlanta. Michael and Larissa Miller from Upper Room, Dallas. Gio Munoz from Abide, Tampa. And, of course, me and Maps Global Music. We're going to be here in the presence of God. We want you with us. So if you've never been to headquarters or you've been here and you love it, come to Annual Gathering 25. You can register at the link below.
Perfect. Okay. So then let's get to, I'll try to do the finished work of the cross in 30 seconds, right? Which we'll be talking about for 1 billion years.
Yeah, we got time.
Yeah. But, and then his perfect obedience, then he offers himself as not only the atoning sacrifice for the trespass of sin, but also the high priest, the representation of all mankind to God. And he gives himself freely on the tree, the cross. And in this moment called the crucifixion of Jesus, you have once for all time, you have it's never happened before, it never happened since, a sinless man is dying. And it basically glitches the whole system because sin's connected to death. The wages of sin is death. And yet once for all time, you have this perfect obedience son who's never sinned experiencing death. And because he's got total identification with humanity, he's fully man, and yet he's got the capacity of the divine. He's fully God,
Right.
One person, two distinct natures, fully God, fully man. That death he's experiencing, it doesn't pertain to him and his sin. So that death begins to bring in, or like I call it a cosmic vacuum. It begins to pull in the sin of the whole world into himself. And on the cross, the body of Jesus, 2 Corinthians 5, God was in Christ reconciling or bringing the whole cosmos into himself. Yeah. Jesus brings humanity, which we find out, a couple 5, 10, 15 years later, not just the Jewish nation of Israel, but all of humanity brings him into himself, pays our debt for sin. We die with him. Paul says, I was crucified with him. We were buried with him in baptism. That's what baptism is. Baptism is both the identification with Jesus in his death in his grave, but it's also, to your point, Paul says it's when we go through the Red Sea. It's the same analogy. We were being chased by our enemies. We were slaves. We went through the waters of baptism like Israel through the Red Sea, and we came out the other side saying God has triumphed victoriously. We're mystically amalgamated. Look that one up. In his death, he comes back. He spends Sabbath in the grave.
Yeah.
He comes back on the morning of the third day, and he brings with him a new creation. And his perfect obedience and his law fulfillment is then given to us, is how I understand it, given to us as a free gift called righteousness. My righteousness is not the works that I've accomplished or my ability to fulfill the law, but it's the Son's perfect obedience accredited to me, and as his life has been given to me. And now I live by faith in his righteousness, not my own righteousness. His life is now my life. His inheritance is now my inheritance. And now this is where I need your perspective. We need your help us. So on the other side, he's fulfilled the law and then accredited that law fulfillment to me in his righteousness. And I think that's what Paul is getting at in Romans 8. And so we get on the other side, and that's called grace, the gift of free righteousness, life forevermore, and adoption by the Father. All of that package is called grace, charis.
Yeah.
Okay. So we get on the other side of it, and now the New Testament writers, particularly Paul, we'll stick on Paul today, starts to talk about how we now relate to the law after the finished work of the cross, and now that grace has been given. And this is where you take us in and just help us get clarity on this. Paul seems to be saying two different things, sometimes in the same chapter. We've died to it. We're no longer under it. It doesn't justify us. 4 verses later, we uphold it and it's good.
Right.
Later, 2 Corinthians, it's the ministry of death written on tablets, and the ministry, the ministry of the Spirit's much more glory. When Moses is read, the veil is lying over us. The Spirit's been given. Couple chapters later, but we're still under the law of liberty, and all of it's summed up in love your neighbor as yourself. He's still quoting Old Testament law. So take us in as much as you want to give us on this. How do we understand the relationship between the law and grace and the finished work of the cross?
That's a good question.
I mean, that's like a 10-week Bible study.
So
but
sometimes I think about the Exodus story as
Okay.
a helpful tool,
Okay.
this narrative. So did we as Israel, do we have anything to do with being rescued? Did we play any part in being rescued from slavery in Egypt?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, you can answer.
I feel like I'm in Sunday school, rabbi school. Yes, Rabbi. No, Rabbi.
Well,
I think
Jesus is usually the answer to any Sunday school question. But
that's true. Does that work the same way in Messianic?
So we could say yes and no.
Yes
so
and no,
from one
yes.
perspective, we didn't really do anything for him to rescue us. He did all of the work.
Yes.
He sent Moses. Joe Israelite was just kind of, was freed. They didn't really do anything from one perspective. But from another perspective, they did do something.
They had to respond to...
They had to put the blood of the lamb on the door.
Right.
They had to respond with emunah, with trust or allegiance or faith. So faith is not just it's not just an ethereal belief. They had to do something. They had to apply the blood of the lamb. And by that, they were then saved, right?
Yes.
So from one perspective, they didn't really do anything. But from the other perspective, they had to apply through emunah, through trusting the blood of the lamb so that they would be freed. Then there's the order of it. They were freed and then they got the Torah, or did they get the Torah while they were still in Egypt?
After.
It was after, right?
Yeah.
Why is that the order? Because that's always the order, right?
Interesting.
He frees us, right?
Yes.
So we're no longer slaves to Egypt or slaves to sin.
Yeah.
We're now slaves to him.
Right.
We are his servants.
Yeah.
And we belong to him.
He's king. He's master.
Our king.
Yeah.
So we have to do what he says.
Right.
So now that this is how it worked with all the ancient treaties, which is Deuteronomy is based on this, on this treaty, an ancient Near East treaty. So he says, because I rescued you, therefore, this is what you have to do, because you're my people now. And this is the story of how I rescued you and how great I am and how much I love you and care about you. And this is the stipulations of the covenant. This is what you have to do now that you're my people. And this is where, and at the end, it shows where the copies of the treaty are.
This is what it looks like to be a citizen in my kingdom.
Right.
Okay.
And this is every ancient Near East treaty looked like that. And the Torah borrowed from this genre.
Interesting.
So, and that's the same, it's the same order now, right? If because we are in Messiah, therefore we follow him and we are empowered to follow him, right?
Yes.
I feel that, and you might probably agree, I can be a better husband being in Messiah than not being in Messiah, right?
I would agree.
I can be a better father. I can be a better leader.
Honestly, I don't know how anybody does it without Jesus.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right? So this is what we're saying. So being in Messiah enables us to follow him, to do the Torah, right? As it applies to us, right? Which, to honor your parents, to do any of those things, it helps to be connected to the source, right? You don't do it so that he will rescue you, but you do it because he rescued you.
I love that.
We love him because he first loved us. So it's just, if you look at the Exodus story, it's just an order thing, right? But it's the same in the new covenant. And I have a friend and colleague, Rabbi Matt Rosenberg, who wrote a book called Jesus Never Said Anything New.
Okay.
And
is it on Amazon?
Yeah. It's,
all right, there you go.
Plug for Rabbi Matt. But he talks about how anything that Yeshua does or says, this is predicted somewhere in the Torah, right? It's not it's gonna be new-ish, right? It's gonna be surprising, maybe the way that it comes out, but it's all in there. You can see it, everything. And so even when he creates or inaugurates the new covenant, in our context, we often say renewed covenant because,
interesting.
And we talked about this last time, but when Yeshua died on the tree and then was raised, he enabled us to follow God and to do what he asked us to do, right? Which is what we just said. So we're actually able to follow his Torah, the Torah of Messiah, because we have faith, because we follow him. And what I believe Paul meant when he said those things are put to death is the sin nature and legalism. Those are the things that Paul is very clearly against.
Define legalism.
Doing the law so that you can appear righteous or trying to justify yourself. Like,
Yeah.
because I did this, therefore I am right with God. No, you're right with God, and therefore you do that.
Yeah.
That's how we would say.
So that was awesome. Thank you. So I think now when you set that order and that kind of overarching narrative in place, when you start to read, I'm just looking down at Romans 3, I have some of the, it starts to make perfect sense then. No, Romans 3, by works of the law, no human being will be justified in God's sight, right? That's works-based self-righteousness.
Yeah.
Since through the law comes the knowledge of sin, we hold that one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. So do we overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. Fascinating. Romans 8, the law of spirit of life has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin, that's the sin nature, and death. For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could never do. In other words, we could never deal ultimately with the sin nature by external obedience to the law.
Yeah.
So God sent his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh. He took on the sin of humanity and for sin and condemned sin in the flesh in order that the righteous requirement of the law would be fulfilled in us who walk not according to the flesh. In other words, we don't now by our own effort try to fulfill the law. We, according to the Spirit who empowers us to walk out the righteousness or the law fulfillment that's been given to us.
Amen.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, go on. I mean, it's so, again, the law is so ubiquitous in the New Testament. So then I think the fascinating then conversation turns to the relationship to the law for those who are never under it,
Right.
versus the relationship in grace by the Spirit through the new covenant, the relationship to the law for those who were given it, i.e. ethnic Israel versus the Gentile nations. This is where we get to Acts 15.
Yeah.
We love Acts 15. I think one of the first times you came on Sunday morning to Maps and I was talking about Acts 15 and you walked up and you were like, Acts 15 is really important for us. I was like, I love this guy.
Yeah, there's a couple scriptures that we always go back to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So let's look at ancient Israel for a second.
Okay.
Under the Torah. So let's say you want to be a good Israelite, right? You want to do all of the laws, right? So every single commandment,
like all 200, 500, how many are there? 613. Sorry, I didn't know that. I know two. I know 10.
That's okay. So you go up to a priest and say, I think I need to be a priest because you guys, there's some laws that only apply to you. And if I become a priest, then I can fulfill all the Torah. And the priest says, well, actually, there's some things that I can't do. I can't go into the Holy of Holies once a year. Right. Because I'm not the high priest. So you really should talk to him. So it's like, okay. So he goes, talks to the high priest, and he says, I want to obey all of the laws. And I think I want to become the high priest so that I can do that. Right. And the high priest says, well, there's this law that only applies to women, and it has to do with bathing once a month. Right. So, and I can't do that. So really you should go talk to a woman. So then he goes and talks to a woman, Josephina Israelite. Right. And he says, I want to fulfill all of the laws. And she says, well, I can't be a priest. Right. So then he realized he's caught in this circle. Okay. And he's never going to be able to do all of the laws because some of the laws don't apply to him because he's not a priest and he's not a woman. Mm. But there are some that apply to him. And that's within Israel, within ancient Israel. Right. So Kal v'chomer, how much more is that going to be when the law is applied to all of the nations? Some of the laws are not going to apply the same way because even within Israel, the law, there's only one Torah. Right. but the laws don't always apply the same way depending on who you are, your distinction, and your calling. You can also take on some laws, right? You can take a Nazirite vow, and not everyone has to do that, right? But if you feel like the Lord called you to do that, then you're going to do it, right? So some of the laws are applied as a calling. Some of them are applied as a measure of your distinct identity, being priest or not, or male or female.
And some of them are a free will offering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of them, exactly. So the law has this cool way of translating for each person. And then when it applies to the nations, there's this crisis, as we mentioned in Acts 15, because they're trying to figure out, can you be not Jewish and follow this Jesus?
So let's set up the story, because we have a little bit of time, actually. We're doing great.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, Antioch's huge for us, right?
Yep.
You know this. And actually, the controversy kind of originates in Antioch. So Paul and Barnabas are back from their first missionary journey. They land back in Antioch, which is kind of their home base, home church. It's where Paul and Barnabas were sent out from. And while they're back there, it says they remained no little time. And while they were back there, Acts 15 says there's some teachers, and Luke remains a bit ambiguous about who this is. Teachers come down from Jerusalem, and they begin to say to the Gentile believers in Antioch, first, and this is where you can help me, because even like maybe as a Gentile, I wouldn't fully even understand the significance, but basically they say, until you're circumcised and follow the law of Moses, you got to do that first before you can be saved or in the kingdom.
In the kingdom, right.
And Paul and Barnabas vehemently oppose them.
And they do in all the letters too, if you read it.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And
so some scholars think that's the same moment that Paul is describing in Galatians 1 when he talks about when he opposed Peter face to face at the love feast, when Peter drew back from the Gentiles, when men from James came down. Yep. It's hard to know the timeline there, but some scholars put those two events together, that the guys who came down from Jerusalem were Peter and James's guys, which kind of makes sense, because then they have Paul called out people. Which makes sense in terms of the reading, because the conclusion of that disagreement is we all go back to Jerusalem and meet together. Yep. And who's present? James, Peter, Paul, Barnabas, and the whole eldership of that church. Okay, so the question is, if you're not Jewish, can you even enter into this? Can you be a part of this thing? And if so, how? Which is a really weird question, because in our day, we would say, how can you be Jewish and follow Jesus? Totally.
But
It's totally
was
flipped.
the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? Because they were all Jews. And they understood from reading the scriptures, and it says, and it seemed good to the Holy Spirit as well, that the nations enter God's people as nations. They enter as they are. Yeah. So if you read, and this is the way it is in the prophets, right? In the story of Ruth, she's always called a Moabitess. She's always a Moab from page 1 to the last part. She doesn't become Israel. She doesn't become Jewish, but she's connected and she's grafted, and she's even part of the lineage of King David and Yeshua. Yeah. So God has a way of bringing the nations in, and he's saying these are little hints in the Torah of that. But now there's the fullness of it in Acts, starting in Acts 10, I think. And they're on the nations really come in. To the
Acts
people
10
of God.
is when Cornelius's house, he's Italian. Yeah. He's praying continually, giving alms. Angel appears and quotes.
Notice that he has to have a vision. That's how important this is.
Totally.
You know?
God sent an angelic messenger to give him understanding of how heaven was interpreting and responding to what was happening in his house.
They essentially had a prejudice, and it's understandable because God.
Oh, you're talking about Peter needed 3 open visions and an audible voice, to even consider
Yes.
going to Cornelius's house.
Yes, exactly. But they had to. It was understandable that they had that prejudice because God dealt primarily with the Jewish people from Abraham until Acts chapter 10. That's a long period of time.
Yeah, that's thousands of
and
years.
There's little hints of it. The nations coming in, like I said, there's the prophet Jonah, there's Ruth.
then the promise to Abraham himself.
But what they're witnessing is that the Holy Spirit, the Shekinah, the presence of God, is falling on non-Jews.
Yes.
And it rocks their world. They don't understand it because it's never happened before.
Yes.
And in this fullness, and they're like, well, how can they enter in? And some of them are teaching, well, they have to become Jewish,
Right.
because that's the only way.
Because in their minds,
that violates God's purpose for the nations.
Right.
Because Abraham is the father of many nations.
Yes.
Right? He's not just the father of Israel.
In your offspring, all the families of the earth.
It's very important that you don't have to become Jewish to be a child of Abraham and a child of God. It's very important.
That's Galatians 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Paul and the other leaders are preserving that. You come in as you are because God made you, and he's going to take off those pagan, you were worshiping Zeus or whatever.
Right.
He's going to take those things off and join you to the God of Israel, but you're not unclean in and of yourself, because that's what Peter thought. He thought those people were unclean
Totally.
because they're worshiping other gods.
Right.
Or they tend to.
Right.
Right. And that's just a prejudice that the Lord himself had to be like, no, those are my people too. Those are my sheep too.
He said,
I
do
care
not
about
call
them.
unclean what I have made clean.
Yeah.
I have
It's
made
not about
clean.
kosher.
No, it's
He's talking about the people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of the finished work of the cross. He's
Exactly.
redeemed for himself a people from every tribe, tongue, nation, and language.
Yeah. Those are my people too. I love them.
Wow.
Those are my sheep too.
Wow.
And I don't love you more than I love them. And there's going to be one flock, one shepherd.
One flock, one shepherd, one new man
Yeah.
joined in the body of Jesus.
Yeah.
So here's where we land at distinction then.
Right.
Because I love the unity part. But I think this would be fascinating and a new idea for most of our listeners, that there's even through the finished work of the cross, the breaking down of the dividing wall of hostility in the body of Yeshua, Ephesians 2, he joined Jew and Gentile together in John 17 unity. Got that from you. And now he's redeemed a new nation, which is what Peter calls a holy ethnos, a chosen genos, a new race,
Right.
and a holy priesthood. So a new priesthood, new nation, new race. But within that nation, there is distinction still between Jew and Gentile. And the question, I think, for the now majority Gentile churches, why? Why do you even need distinction? We're all joined in Jesus. Acts 15, we didn't finish the story, but they all gather together. They hear the stories of Antioch. They hear Peter's account of Cornelius's house, where the Holy Spirit fell on bacon-eating Italian salami Roman guys.
God bless him.
Doing a thank you. We receive that blessing. Doing a house of prayer.
Yeah.
And they hear it all. And James, of all people, stands up and says, with these words, the prophets agree. And he quotes Amos 9:11 about the rebuilding of the tabernacle of David. Then they write a letter to the entire Gentile church. I mean, this first letter from the elders in Jerusalem, they write a letter and they basically said, you're in by faith, abstain from sexual immorality and food sacrificed to idols. Amen. You're on your way.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to distinction, give us commentary on that. Were they saying the law doesn't, in its totality, doesn't apply to you? Well, by just giving a few different encouragements, and what were they saying about Gentiles' relationship to the law?
I think they were addressing the question, do you have to be Jewish to be God's child? Can you enter in as you are?
And in the Davidic kingdom.
And the marker for Jewish identity here is circumcision.
Yeah.
And the not just the act, but also there's a blessing and there's a whole thing. So there's a covenant. So that's the question they're answering. And they say no. They answer it with a no, and the Holy Spirit answers with a no.
Yes.
And they say, if you do these things, which are probably derived from what was applicable to Noah.
Interesting.
So Noah could not eat blood, consume blood. Noah, the laws, the Noahide laws, which we are all descended from Noah.
Right.
So, and then I think if you read the rest of the New Testament, like, let's take Ephesians, for example. Ephesians 4-6 is a lot of moral encouragement.
Yes.
And the beginning of chapter 4, it says, this is the way you shall walk. Mm-hmm. Why does Paul say walk? Because that's halakha. Halakha is the way to walk. So you could say that Ephesians 4-6 is halakha, the interpretation of Torah for Gentiles. Because the congregation in Ephesus was mostly
Gentiles. Yeah.
And what does he say? Does he talk a lot about kosher? Does he talk a lot about Shabbat? He talks about how we relate to one another. The moral thrust of the Torah.
Interesting.
Love your wives. Yeah. Respect your parents.
Don't let anything unwholesome come out of your mouth.
Exactly. Yeah. This is what you should do. And the Jewish identity markers are not, you don't have to do them. If you want to keep kosher, if you feel like the Lord is calling you, like a Nazirite vow, calling you to do that, go for it.
But it's no benefit. It doesn't get you anything.
It doesn't get
you extra credit in the kingdom.
No.
Yeah.
But if you feel like the Lord called you to do it,
and your conscience.
Yeah. Yeah. The same as if he called me to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Right? Then I have to obey that because I feel like God asked me to do that.
Yeah.
So there are some Gentiles that I think God asked them to keep kosher or do other Jewish identity markers.
But it's a personal conscience
personal calling, we would say. But as a whole, we don't believe in Messianic Judaism that he has required all of the nations to keep the Jewish identity markers, namely circumcision, Shabbat, and kosher, and some of those other things that define the Jewish people as a people.
That's so good.
But they are free to, and God has called some of them to do it.
Well, and Paul, like later on in Romans and then in Corinthians again, even like in regards to some of the festivals, even the festivals within the Roman and Greek world, to festivals that are celebrating new moons and all kinds of gods, Paul's like, you can go and celebrate it if it doesn't violate your conscience, and don't judge each other for not celebrating it. But if your conscience is saying, hey, I can't participate in this, don't do that, because that'll be sin.
That's calling.
And so there's a lot of personal conscience involved. So I
want to say one more thing about Acts 15, though.
Please.
Because there's an assumption there. If they're trying to figure out how a non-Jew can enter in to the people of God, what is the underlying assumption there? I think the underlying assumption is that Jews have to keep the Torah. Otherwise, they wouldn't be having this council.
Totally.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
No,
so I just wanted to say that
it's explicitly
they're
clear.
All Jews, and they all understand that the Torah is incumbent upon the Jewish people. It's part of an eternal covenant that doesn't change, right?
Yes.
And so I just wanted to say that. And I wanted to also respond to an earlier question you had. So,
okay.
In this spiritual family, MAPS, does everyone have the same calling that you have?
I would use the word assignment, not to be nitpicking. Yeah, because I think, yes, I would say, yes, we all have the same calling to love the Lord your God with all our hearts. Yeah, okay.
Assignment.
So yes. No, they don't.
No. Personality, gifts.
Thank
strengths.
God. No.
Thank God.
Thank God.
Anyone that works on a team will tell you, I'm so glad that not everyone is like me.
Yes.
Because, if you're on a team, if you're married, you're on a team, right?
Yeah.
There's a distinction there that's helpful.
Yes.
Because my wife has certain gifts, certain strengths, that she sees things that I would never see.
Yeah.
Right? Often, if it's in the fridge, she can see it and I can't, even though it's right in front of me. It's just
I think that's a universal
it may be a
problem.
It may apply to more people than myself.
I promise. I looked 5 times.
Anyway, I don't want to get too off track, but anyone that's on a team will tell you that I'm so glad that not everyone is like me.
Yeah.
And that's the way the New Testament describes the body of Messiah, as we're different body parts. right?
Yeah.
The hand can't say to the eye, I don't need you. That's
Totally.
foolish,
Yeah.
right? So Israel cannot say to the nations, you all need to be like me. Or that's just foolish. So those distinctions in the body of Messiah are God-given for his purpose. Now, the problem is if you elevate it, right? If I'm in my marriage and say, well, I'm the man and I'm blah, 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 that's no good.
Yeah.
Right? Or if I say, and I think early on
In terms of a hierarchy.
I think early on in the ministry, I was a little bit proud in my Jewish identity. And I was like, well, I know the Jewishness of Jesus and Paul and stuff.
Totally.
And I had to humble myself before the Lord, because I have a lot to learn from the historic church.
And vice versa. Yeah.
But that was my journey. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think the distinctions are good as long as you don't elevate them, but they're not only good, but they're required, right? Because that's how God designed it. God designed a team of two different distinct identities, Jewish and non-Jewish, in the peoplehood of God, for a purpose that we would work together and show his body, reflect who he is as a whole. Remember, because not one individual Israelite can't do all the Torah, right? They can't reflect God in their own person. They need the rest of Israel to do it. They need the women, they need the priests.
Yeah.
Right? So I need my covenant partners.
Yeah.
In the Gentile church in order to reflect who God is.
The fullness of God's
have it
glory.
all.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't have it all.
Okay, so we'll land with this. You're basically probably gonna. You already answered it, but I just want to ask it like clearly to you.
Yeah.
But before I do that, let me just encapsulate the point you make here. See if we can lead in. So the conformity or the unity that Paul is talking about, the place where there's not a distinction, and he says it twice. Once in Galatians 3, he says here in the new creation, in the body of Jesus, is neither male nor female, Greek or Jew nor Gentile, slave or free. And so there's, in one sense, in a very high sense, an erasing of lines there, and there's a unity, but then it's clear that there's still distinction. Like the finished work of the cross didn't make me an androgynous.
There are theologians that say that that's what that means. That there's no, you're a nothing.
I think, to borrow Wesley's point, that's unreasonable, right? It's like,
but yeah. So what I think Paul means there, and this is what most Messianic Jewish scholars think he means, is that in terms of how we're valued,
our position before God,
there's no difference.
Totally,
there's no difference between God loves me as much as He loves you.
Totally.
But in terms of our assignment, our calling, our what He's asked us to do, the way that we're our gift set, and yes, our Jewish identity, our masculine and feminine identity, those are God-given for a purpose.
So just like God honors, preserves, and dignifies the distinction between male and female to show His full glory,
right?
So
because one of them alone can't do it.
Totally. So in the same way He honors the distinction between Jew and Gentile, even though we're in the same body, the distinction is good and right to show His full glory on the earth and His reconciling power.
And if there isn't a distinction, it can't be unity. If there's uniformity, it's not unity.
That's a whole nother podcast. That is such
each other.
Profound statement. I totally agree with you.
So the word echad means one.
Right.
The first time it appears in the Torah it was evening, it was morning, one day.
Okay.
So we know that, and the meaning of a word is highly based on the first time it's used. So the meaning of echad, the meaning of one, is based on the idea of there was evening and there was morning, yom echad.
Right.
So a day consists of two parts. And if it's just evening, it's not a day.
Always, from the beginning, always in one, they were distinct parts.
Yeah, that's the meaning of the word echad.
Yeah,
and then the next time it's used, the man and his wife became one flesh.
Yeah.
Well, that's obviously two different things.
Yeah.
No one's going to argue that it's not two, but in some mysterious way, it's also one. It's a unity of distinction.
Right.
And if one elevates, then it's no good.
Right.
Right. But if they don't understand who they are, it's no good either.
Yep.
So that's the idea of the team. And then it's also used in the Shema. Hear, listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. What kind of one is he? He's a
3 persons, 1 essence.
distinct parts.
Love it, man. You are helping so much right now. Okay, here's where we're land. You've probably already answered it, but just to ask it explicitly to you so you can kind of explain it, because I think this is where you and I have really mined down. Okay, if we've died to the law, if it brought acknowledgement of sin,
I would say we died to legalism or died to the sin nature. Yeah.
but Paul says to the law. I mean, that's what he says. But that's what he says.
That's
yeah.
in the
what
context,
he means.
that's what I think
okay.
it means. Okay.
Yeah. Don't.
Law of sin and death.
Yes, we died to it. We're no longer under it. Galatians 3. We're not justified by it. It doesn't bring righteousness. 2 Corinthians 3. It's passing away. So then, why, oh why, my dear friend, would you, as a Messianic follower of Jesus, still want to live out Torah?
You know, I ask myself that every day. Why am I doing this?
Because I think what we landed at is that that's not applicable to me in the same way it is to you. Is that right?
Yeah, I would
So
say
then
that.
why, oh why, if all of that is true, you kind of answered it because you said legalism, but do you, as a Messianic, ethnic Jewish follower of Yeshua, what is the benefit of you still having a relationship with the Torah in which you're by the Spirit and you feel it's an obedience issue to still observe Torah? That's how I say it.
It's a really good question. I think it goes back to the faithfulness of God.
Okay.
So if God is the kind of God that tried something, right? I want to make a promise, a covenant with this people. Oh, you know what? That was a terrible idea. My bad, guys. I actually don't really care about you or you know what? I'm gonna start over with this people.
Yeah.
Then that God is schizophrenic. That God is not the God that we worship. So in my life,
His faithfulness is then contingent on our obedience.
Yeah. It's not, we're proclaiming something, we're showing off a God that is schizophrenic.
Yeah.
And that's not accurate.
Yeah.
So in my life, what I try to do is to live out a life in such a way that shows that God is faithful and God is consistent.
Okay.
Right. So if God made a promise with my people, even if it was, 3,000 years ago, to follow a set of laws, to be a light to the nations, and then he sent his Messiah to say, yeah, the law is good, and I came to fulfill this, and I brought out the true meaning of it.
Yeah.
And if he did all of that, and he gave us the writings of Paul to say, I uphold the Torah, right? Then I think I need to take it seriously to show that God is faithful to 2 groups of people. One is to my Jewish brothers and sisters, right? Because if they see that
Unbelieving. You're
yeah.
talking about- okay.
Yeah, not yet.
Yeah.
If they see me and they see that I'm trying to be faithful to the Torah, not as a way to gain righteousness, but
Right.
as a sense of identity and calling and covenant,
Yes.
then that shows that the God of Israel is the God of Jesus. right?
Interesting.
It's the same trajectory.
Interesting.
It shows God's
Yes.
faithfulness to my own people, which I think is what Paul did.
So there's
think
an
that was Paul's heart.
evangelistic part to that?
Yeah, but
Interesting.
also, but it's not just that.
Yes,
It is missional,
Yeah.
but I think that's secondary to
Okay.
in my own gut showing that God is faithful,
Yeah.
right? Because he made me to be a Jew, and he doesn't make mistakes,
Yeah.
right? And so, and if I walk that out, then I am showing God's faithfulness to the Jewish people and to the nations. And if I am not only keeping, the Torah and the Shabbat, but if I'm growing in love and
Yeah.
growing in the fruits of the Spirit,
Yeah.
then the Jewish people will say, "Oh, the Lord is with you."
Yes.
And, that's the ballgame.
I love that. I love you
Love you, brother.
I really appreciate this time. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I don't know about you, but I took a lot away from this conversation. I really, really appreciate you. This has been a wonderful time with a conversation with a rabbi, Rabbi David Weim. So next, I'm going to give him a little teaser. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Next podcast that will come out is a discussion between Rabbi David and I concerning now 2,000 years later after Acts 15, and there's been a dynamic ethnic shift in the church. The church is mostly Gentile. This is crazy.
Yeah. We just took a 1,700 year break.
Yeah.
The Jewish people. But now we're back, in Messianic Jews.
We're back. But now we've got to take all that we've described here theologically, and now we've got to really think about how to apply it missiologically. How then do we as believers in Yeshua relate to, you said not yet believing Israel. I think that's accurate. Unbelieving Israel. And then
I say I'm not weird. I'm just early.
And I see how you say that. And then two, I think we have to then say, well, how does this country in the Middle East called Israel, this geopolitical state, how does it fit into this whole narrative? What does it mean to be pro-Israel? And that's going to be an awesome conversation. So if you're interested in that one, go listen to the one before this, listen to this one, and it'll set us up for that conversation. I'm looking forward to it, friend. I love you.
Love you, brother.
And we'll see you guys next time on the Maps Global Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Maps Global Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and check out previous episodes. Have you seen our 50 Hours documentary? Watch it now. And don't forget to sign up for our email newsletters.